The cold was not just weather. It was a judgment. It came down from the mountains of Wyoming with a hard, white edge, promising to strip the land clean, to peel the bark from the trees and the hope from a man's heart. Eli McCade felt it in his bones, a familiar ache that mirrored the old scars on his back. He pulled his collar tighter, the wool rough against his jaw, and urged his horse forward. The ranch was still 2 miles off, and the sky was closing in, the color of a fresh bruise. He had been riding this line for 10 years, alone, and he knew every rock and every barren dip in the hills. His land was harsh, but it was honest. It did not lie to you. It told you plainly that it would try to kill you, and it was a man's job to not let it. That is why he stopped. Through the curtain of the first heavy snow, he saw it, a thin gray finger of smoke, rising from the valley of his southern pasture. It was a place he never went. It was a place where nothing lived but the ghosts of a failed homestead, the timbers of a barn collapsing in on themselves. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant a person, and a person, on Eli's land, meant trouble. He unhooked the leather strap from his rifle, his movements slow and deliberate. He did not feel fear. He felt a deep, cold irritation. He had built this isolation one silent day at a time, and he would not have it broken. He nudged his horse off the trail, moving through the pines that muffled the sound of his approach. The wind was a howl now, tearing at his coat. He smelled the smoke before he saw the source, not a campfire, but the pitiful, choking smoke of wet, rotten wood. He dismounted, tying his horse to a low branch, and walked the last 100 yards. He saw the mule first. Its head hung so low its nose touched the snow, ribs stark beneath its hide. A broken-down wagon sat nearby. One wheel shattered, the axle splintered, and then he saw her. She was fighting the barn door. She was a small thing, hardly bigger than a boy, lost inside a man's coat that was stiff with ice and dirt. She was trying to pry the massive, warped barn door open, using a piece of the broken wagon as a lever. The door was frozen solid to the ground. It would not budge. "Damn you!" Her voice was a cracked whisper, lost in the wind. "Damn you to hell, just open!" She kicked the wood, a useless, angry gesture that nearly sent her sprawling. Eli watched for a long moment. He saw the way her hands, raw and blue at the knuckles, trembled on the wood. He saw the desperation, the fury. This was not a traveler seeking shelter. This was a cornered animal, biting at the trap. He stepped out from the trees. "That door has not been opened since the war." The woman spun around, lifting the wagon piece like a club. Her eyes were wild, wide with a fear that was instantly covered by a sharp, brittle anger. Her face was gaunt, her cheeks raw from the wind, her lips cracked and bleeding. "I am just passing through," she spat, her breath pluming. "The wagon broke. I mean, no trouble. I just need shelter for the mule." Eli's gaze moved from her face to the broken axle, to the empty wagon bed. No provisions, no blankets, nothing. "You are not passing through," he said. It was not a question. "You are stopping, and you are trespassing." "Then run me off." She hefted the piece of wood. "Go on. I do not care, but I will not leave the mule to freeze." He looked at the sky. The snow was coming faster now, horizontal. "You will not last the night, neither will the mule." "That is my concern." He sighed, a low, rough sound. He was tired. The cold was getting into him. "My name is Eli McCade. This is my land. The house is a mile north." "I do not want your house. I want this barn." "This barn is falling down, and the door is frozen." He walked past her, ignoring the weapon she held, and put his shoulder to the door. He shoved. It did not move. The ice had sealed it like mortar. "It needs to be chopped out," he said, turning back to her. "You do not have the time. The storm will be on you." "I am not leaving my wagon." "The wagon is firewood," he said, his voice flat. "It is done." He saw the fight in her eyes waver. just for a second, and a terrible, hollow grief looked out. It was gone in an instant. "My name is Cora Hensley," she said, her voice stiff with pride. "I am a widow. I require no help. I will break the ice myself." She turned back to the door and slammed the lever against the frozen ground. A chip of ice flew off. Nothing more. "Mrs. Hensley," Eli said, his patience gone. "You are dying. Stop being a fool." "I am not a fool," she screamed, rounding on him. I am. Her knees buckled. It was not a faint. It was as if the strings holding her upright had been cut. She collapsed into the snow, the wagon piece falling from her numb fingers. She did not try to get up. She just curled onto her side, her body shaking in one long, violent shudder. Eli stood over her. This was the trouble he had expected. This was the world intruding, bringing its weakness and its pain to his door. He should have turned around. He should have ridden on. He cursed, low and deep. He bent down, sliding one arm under her knees and the other behind her back. She was nothing, a bundle of wet rags and sharp bones. She made a small, broken sound in her throat, a sound of protest, but she had no strength left to fight him. He carried her to his horse. He lifted her onto the saddle, then mounted behind her, pulling her back against his chest. She was rigid, holding herself away from him, even in her weakness. "The mule," she whispered, her voice failing. "It will follow the horse," he said. He whistled, a sharp, clear sound. The weary mule lifted its head and with a groan began to trudge after them. The ride to the house was silent, save for the shriek of the wind and the dull thud of the hooves. Eli felt the small, cold body in front of him, shaking so hard he thought her bones might come apart. He did not offer comfort. He just held her steady, his arm a solid bar across her waist, and pointed his horse toward the lightless shape of his cabin. He carried her inside and laid her on the braided rug in front of the hearth. The cabin was cold, the fire in the stove long dead. But it was quiet. The wind was a muffled roar outside, not a blade against the skin. He did not look at her. He went about his chores. He dropped wood into the pot-bellied stove, struck a match, and coaxed the kindling to life. He broke the ice in the water bucket. He lit the lantern, and its yellow light pushed back the gray gloom, revealing the sparse room. One bed, one chair, one table, a shelf with 3 tins and a bag of coffee. Only when the stove began to throw off a fierce, dry heat did he turn his attention back to her. She had not moved. She was watching him, her eyes tracking every motion. "You should get out of those wet things," he said, his back to her. He heard a rustle, the sound of stiff, frozen cloth moving. "I have nothing else." He went to a wooden chest at the foot of his bed. He pulled out a heavy wool blanket, the kind meant for a horse, but it was clean. He threw it onto the floor beside her. "This will do. I'm going to see to the animals." He did not wait for an answer. He took his coat and rifle and went back into the storm. He led his horse and her mule into the small, sturdy stable attached to the cabin. He rubbed them down, gave them feed and fresh water. He took his time. He fixed a loose board on the stable wall. He checked the latch on the grain bin. He did any small, useless thing he could find to do, putting off the moment he would have to go back inside. When he finally returned, the cabin was warm. She was wrapped in the blanket, her wet clothes piled in a dark heap by the door. She was asleep, her breathing shallow, her face turned toward the fire. Eli poured himself a cup of coffee he had made hours earlier, drinking it black and cold. He sat in the single wooden chair in the corner of the room and watched her. He saw the bruise high on her cheekbone, turning a dark, ugly purple. He saw the blister on her lip. Her hands, resting outside the blanket, were scraped and raw, the nails broken. She was a woman who had been chewed up and spat out by the world, and now she was his problem. He sat there all night. He loaded the stove when the fire burned low. He listened to the storm try to tear his home from the earth. And he watched the widow sleep, his rifle resting across his knees. She was awake before him. When he opened his eyes, the storm had quieted, and a pale gray light filled the room. She was on her knees, feeding wood into the stove, her movements stiff. She still wore the blanket, wrapped around her like a shroud. "There is coffee on the stove," he said. She flinched, startled. She had not known he was awake. "I do not want your coffee." "It is made." She stood slowly, her joints popping in the cold air. She looked at the pot, then at him. Her pride was a physical thing, a wall she was building brick by brick. "I will work," she said. "I will earn what I took, the shelter, the feed for the mule." Eli nodded, pulling on his boots. "The woodpile is out back. The axe is by the door. I have stock to feed." He left her there. He did not offer her food, or his coat. He knew she would not take it. If work was the only coin she had, he would let her spend it. All day, they worked. They did not speak. The world was a muffled white. The snow drifted higher than the windowsills. He shoveled paths to the barn and the well. He heard, from the side of the house, the steady, rhythmic thunk of the axe. It was a slow rhythm with long pauses. He knew her strength was gone, that she was running on pure spite, but the sound did not stop. When he came back inside at noon, she was gone. The floor was swept clean. His tin dishes were washed and stacked. The blanket he had given her was folded neatly on the rug. He looked out the window. She was hauling water from the well, bucket by bucket, refilling his barrel. She spilled half of it on the snow, her arms shaking, but she went back for more. He turned away from the window, a knot tightening in his gut. He busied himself mending a piece of tack, the smell of leather and oil filling the small room. He found his mind drifting, something he did not often allow. He found himself thinking of the war. The cold then had been the same, but it had smelled of smoke and fear. He remembered the face of a boy from Georgia, no older than 15, staring up at him as the blood soaked the snow. Eli had pressed his hand to the wound, but it was like trying to hold water. The boy's eyes had gone dull, and Eli had taken his rifle and moved on. There was always more to do, always another face he could not save. He thought of the raiders who had come after, the ones who had burned his parents' farm in Missouri. He had been too late. He had come home to smoke and silence, to two shapes under a scorched blanket. He had buried them and ridden west, and he had not stopped until he found this piece of land that was as cold and empty as he was. He looked up. Cora was standing in the doorway, her shoulders covered in fresh snow. She was looking at his hands, at the piece of leather he was stitching. She said nothing. She moved to the hearth, picked up a torn wool blanket from his chest, and found a needle and thread in a small tin on his shelf. She sat on the floor, as far from him as she could get, and she began to sew. Her stitches were small and neat. Her hands, though cracked and shaking, were steady with the needle. As she worked, she saw not the wool, but the cottonwood tree. She saw her husband, Jesse, standing on the wagon bed, the rope already around his neck. He had looked at her, just at her. He had not begged the men. He had not pleaded. He had only looked at Eora. They had called him a land thief. They had called him a savage, his blood a stain on the town. They had said he got what he deserved for trying to claim land that was meant for white men. And when he was gone, when his body hung still in the afternoon sun, the men had turned to look at her, the preacher, the blacksmith, the sheriff. They had not touched her. They had just looked, their eyes full of judgment, branding her with his shame. She had buried him herself, with her bare hands, and fled north. The thread snapped in her fingers. She flinched and put her bleeding finger in her mouth. Eli did not look up from his work. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Late in the afternoon, the snow lightened. Cora put the mended blanket down. She pulled on her frozen coat and went outside. Eli watched her through the window. She did not go to the woodpile. or the well. She walked past the cabin, up the small rise behind it. She stopped at the place he never looked. It was a small mound of stones, with a crude wooden cross shoved into the frozen earth, a grave. She stood there for a long time. The wind whipped her thin hair across her face. Then, slowly, she knelt in the snow. She did not pray. She did not weep. She just knelt, her hand resting on the stones, as if offering comfort to the dead. Eli felt a cold, sharp anger rise in him. That was his place, his grief. It was not for her. He had buried his own child there, a daughter born silent and blue in this very cabin, his wife dying 2 days later. He had put them both in the ground and built his wall of silence. And here was this stranger, this widow, touching his loss with her filthy, broken hands. He watched her. He watched her kneel in the snow, a small, dark shape against the vast white. She was not trespassing on his land. She was trespassing on his pain. And yet, he did not go out. He did not tell her to move. She was thinking of her own daughter, the one she had buried on the prairie, 2 weeks ago, wrapped in her last good shawl. She had marked it with a pile of rocks, but she knew the coyotes would find it. She had cried then. She had no tears left now. She felt a strange kinship with the small, frozen grave. "I know," she whispered to it. "I know." When she came back inside, her face was pale, her eyes hollow. She did not look at him. She just went back to the hearth. Night fell. The storm returned, lashing the cabin with new fury. Eli lit the lantern. He took a tin of stew from the shelf and heated it on the stove. He split it between 2 bowls. "Eat," he said. She stared at the bowl. She ate. They ate in silence. The only sounds, the scrape of spoons and the scream of the wind. When she was done, she stood. "I will sleep in the barn, with my mule." "It is colder than last night," Eli said. "It is shelter. I have earned it." Her chin was high. "You are a stubborn woman." "I am an honest one. I will not take charity. I will not sleep in your house." Eli looked at her, at the pride that was all she had left. He knew he could not break it. He banked the fire in the stove, grabbed 2 of his thickest blankets, and picked up the lantern. "Fine," he said. "The barn it is." The barn was frigid. The wind found every crack in the wood. The mule brayed softly when they entered. Cora had made a small, clean space in an empty stall, laying down fresh straw. She had a bucket and was trying to build a fire in it, but the wood was damp and only smoked. Eli set the lantern down. He laid the blankets on the straw. He watched her struggle with the fire. "That will not light," he said. "It will light." "You are wasting the matches." He kicked a larger log from the pile he had stacked there earlier. "You need to split this. Get to the dry heartwood." He handed her the shovel. It was the only tool they had. She took it, positioning the blade on a crack in the log. She lifted it and brought it down. It bounced off. She tried again, her breath hissing between her teeth. Nothing. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the handle. "Damn it," she whispered, tears of pure frustration freezing on her cheeks. Eli let out a low, rough breath. He was tired of this. Tired of her, tired of the cold, tired of the weakness. He stepped behind her. She went utterly still. "You are holding it wrong." His voice was low, close to her ear. He put his hands over hers on the shovel handle. His hands were huge, scarred and calloused, and they swallowed hers completely. The warmth from his body was a shock. She could feel the solid wall of his chest against her back. She smelled wood smoke and leather, and the clean, cold scent of the snow on his coat. "Your stance is off," he growled. He nudged her foot with his boot. "Spread it open. Get your balance." She moved her foot, her body rigid. He repositioned the shovel blade, setting it deep in the crack. "Now, hold it steady. Do it with force." They drove the shovel down together. His strength, combined with her desperate weight, split the log with a sharp crack. Neither of them moved. The wind howled. The mule stamped its foot. Eli did not step back. Cora did not pull away. She was breathing fast, her shoulders rising and falling. He could feel every tremor. She flinched. A small, sharp movement, but it was not from fear. He knew what fear looked like. This was something else. This was the flinch of a nerve touched, a string plucked. It was the shock of contact. A long, terrible moment passed. He was too close. He knew it. She knew it. She turned her head just slightly, her cheek brushing the rough wool of his coat. He looked down. He could see the pulse beating in her throat. Then it broke. Cora ripped her hands from under his and stumbled back, clutching her arms. He stepped away, his face a mask of stone. A deep, burning shame flooded them both. He was ashamed of the sudden, brutal flash of wanting, the simple need for a warm body in the cold. She was ashamed of her own body's betrayal, the flicker of heat in a place that had only known grief and pain. Eli turned without a word. He grabbed the lantern, his movement stiff, and walked out of the barn, leaving her in the dark with the blankets, the mule, and the splintered wood. He walked back to his empty cabin, the snow stinging his face, and bolted the door behind him. The storm did not break. It settled. It dug in its claws, and the world went from gray to a blinding, suffocating white. For 3 days, the wind did not stop screaming. It was a living thing, a predator circling the cabin, testing the windows, shaking the door in its frame. Eli woke in his chair, a fresh ache in his neck. The fire was low. He looked at the spot by the hearth where he had left Cora the night she arrived. Then his eyes went to the door, bolted, where he had left it after walking out of the barn, the shame burning hot in his chest. He rose, his joints stiff, and pulled on his coat. He opened the door. The snow was a solid wall, drifted to the height of his waist. He had to shove his shoulder into it, carving a path just to get out. The cold hit him like a fist. He waded through the drifts to the barn. The mule whickered, its breath a cloud of steam in the frigid air. Cora was in the stall, huddled under the 2 blankets he had given her, her back against the rough wood. She was awake. Her eyes, 2 dark bruises in her pale face, followed him as he moved. "You cannot stay here," he said. His voice was rougher than he intended, raw from the cold. "I am fine. The barn will be 30 below tonight. You will be dead by morning. The mule will be dead." She said nothing, just pulled the blanket tighter. Her pride was a thin, frozen thing, but she held to it. "Get up," he said. No. He did not have the patience for this. He was not a kind man, and the storm was wearing on him. He stepped into the stall, bent down, and grabbed the blankets. He pulled. She tumbled out onto the straw, gasping, clutching at the wool. "Stop it!" she cried, scrambling to her feet. "Leave me be!" "You are coming inside." He didn't wait for her. He turned and began wading back to the cabin. He did not look back. He knew she would follow. To stay was to die, and she was, despite everything, a fighter. He heard the crunch of her steps behind him, the sob of her breath as she fought the deep snow. He held the cabin door open. She stumbled past him, her face caked in snow, her hands blue. She did not look at him. She went straight to the stove, holding her hands out to the weak warmth. "There is wood," he said, pointing to the box. "Keep it fed." He went back out, fought his way to the stable, and brought the mule into the barn's center aisle, where it was most sheltered. He gave it the last of the good hay and broke the ice in its water bucket, his hands aching with the cold. He spent an hour securing the door, nailing a loose plank back in place, stuffing straw into the cracks where the wind whistled through. He was putting off his return. When he went back inside, the cabin was stifling. She had filled the stove until it glowed a dull red, the metal ticking with the heat. She was on the hearth, wrapped in her blankets again, her wet boots steaming beside her. And so their rhythm began. The cabin was one room. There was no escape. They moved around each other like two wary animals forced into the same cage. He slept in the chair, his rifle beside him. She slept on the floor by the fire. Mornings were silent. He would rise in the dark, light the lantern, and pull on his boots. He would go out to clear the snow, to check on the stock, his breath freezing in his beard. When he came back, she would be up, the coffee pot hot. She would have already swept the floor. Her few belongings, a small tin box, a brush with missing bristles, piled neatly by her blankets. He would pour 2 cups of coffee. He would set one on the table. She would wait until he sat down before she took it. He ate smoked jerky and hardtack. She had nothing. On the second day, he took a sack of flour from his stores and dumped it on the table. He added a tin of lard and a small sack of salt. He did not say anything. He just pushed them toward her. She looked at the flour, then at him. "I cannot pay." "You are working," he said. "You swept the floor." Her eyes flashed, but she held her tongue. She took a bowl, mixed the flour and lard with snowmelt, and made flat, dense biscuits. Cooking them in his cast-iron skillet, they ate them standing, one on each side of the stove. The silence was heavier than the snow. It was filled with the things they did not say. It was filled with the memory of the barn, of his hands on hers, of her back against his chest. Every accidental touch was a spark. When she reached for the coffee pot at the same time he did, their fingers brushed. She snatched her hand back as if burned. He froze, his jaw tight, then slowly poured his cup. He watched her sometimes when she thought he was not looking. He watched her mend his canvas coat, her stitches small and perfect, her brow furrowed in concentration. He saw the strength in her hands, despite their trembling. He saw the deep, hollowed-out grief in her eyes when she stared into the fire. She watched him, too. She saw the way he favored his left leg when he was tired. She saw the scars that disappeared under his collar, angry and white against his skin. She saw him stand by the window for an underscore hour at a time, just staring into the white fury of the storm, his shoulders set, as if holding the roof up by will alone. On the 4th day, the silence finally cracked. She was kneading another batch of biscuits, her hands covered in flour. "He was not a thief," she said. Eli did not look up. He was cleaning his rifle, the smell of oil and solvent filling the air. "Who?" "My husband, Jesse. The men who did it. They called him a land thief. But it was his land. His mother was Shoshone. It was her father's land. They said a paper in Cheyenne meant more than 1,000 years of his people." Eli snapped the rifle bolt back into place. Click. "He built our cabin with his own hands," she whispered, her hands slowing in the dough. "We had a good crop coming. Corn, beans. We had 2 cows and a girl." Her voice broke on the last word. She stopped, her back to him, her shoulders shaking. Eli set the rifle down. He waited. "She was 2 years old," Cora said, her voice muffled. "Lydia, she had his eyes. Black, so black you could fall into them." She wiped her face with her floury arm, leaving a white streak. "When they came, they did not care. They burned the corn. They took the cows. They said he was a savage, and any man who married one was no better." She stopped, breathing hard. Eli looked at the back of her head. He saw the war again. He saw the raiders, the smoke, the charred remains of his own home. He said nothing. "They hung him from the cottonwood by the creek," she said, her voice flat. "Dead. They made me watch. They said it was a lesson, so I would know my place." She turned around. Her face was a mask of flour and tears. "I have no place, Mr. McCade. They took Lydia from me. The fever. 2 weeks on the prairie. Running. I buried her myself. With rocks. I do not even know if she is still there." She slid down the wall. her hands falling limp at her sides, leaving white prints on her dark skirt. "And now," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Now there is another—" Eli went still. The ticking of the stove was loud in the sudden silence. "Another—" "I am pregnant," she said. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, frantic. "I am 4 months gone. It was his, Jesse's, and I do not want it." She spat the words. "I will not bring another child into this, to be hated, to be hunted, to have no place. I was going to Cheyenne. I heard there is a preacher there, a man who takes in unwanted children, to give it away, so it might have a chance, a life." She looked down at her own stomach, a small, barely noticeable swell under the ragged wool. "No child deserves a life like this. No child deserves me." Eli stood. He walked to the stove, poured himself a cup of coffee. His hand was steady. He drank it, the scalding liquid burning his throat. He thought of his own grave, on the hill, the small pile of stones, his silent daughter, his wife, Mary, who had bled out on the same bed he now offered to no one. He had cursed God then. He had cursed the land. He had cursed himself. He set the cup down. He looked at Cora, this small, broken woman who had clawed her way to his door. "The bed is warmer," he said. She stared at him, confused. "What?" "The bed. You take it. I will take the floor." She recoiled, as if he had slapped her. "No, I will not. I am not." She struggled for the word. "I will not be pitied." "It is not pity. It is practical. You are carrying a child. You need warmth. I am stronger." "No." She shook her head, pulling her pride around her like armor. "I will not take your bed, Mr. McCade. I am grateful for the shelter, but I will remain in the barn. The storm is lessening." "The storm is not lessening," he said. But he did not argue. He saw the look in her eye, the same brittle anger she'd had at the barn door. To push her was to break her. He nodded once. "As you wish." He picked up his coat and went back out into the snow. He did not come back until long after dark. That night, the cold deepened. It was a still, blade-sharp cold that found its way through every chink. Eli lay in his chair, half awake, listening. He heard the wind die, replaced by the snapping of the trees as their sap froze. He heard the house creak and groan as it settled. And then he heard a scream. It was not loud. It was a choked, terrified sound, ripped from a throat. He was on his feet in an instant, his rifle in his hand. He unbolted the door and ran, stocking-footed, into the snow. The cold was so intense it stole his breath. He reached the barn. The door was open, swinging slightly. "Cora?" He saw her. She was 20 yards past the barn, running barefoot toward the trees. She was wearing only her thin shift. She was running from something he could not see. "Cora!" He caught her at the edge of the pines. He grabbed her arm, and she spun on him, her hands raised, her face a mask of pure, animal terror. She did not know him. "No!" she shrieked, striking at his chest. "No! Jesse, run! They are here! Run!" She was lost. Her eyes were wide, seeing not him but the nightmare. "Cora, it is me, Eli. You are safe." He pulled her against him, hard, wrapping his arms around her thin, shaking body. She fought him for a moment, her small fists beating against his coat, her sobs tearing through her. "He is gone," she wept, her face buried in his chest. "They killed him. They left him hanging. Oh, God, he is so cold." "I know," Eli said. He just held her. He held her as the sobs racked her body, as the cold bit at them both. He felt the terrible, shaking tremors of her grief, a grief so large it threatened to swallow her whole. He lifted her. She was light, her bare feet already blue, her shift frozen stiff. He carried her back to the cabin, kicking the door shut behind them. He did not put her down. He carried her to the hearth, to the braided rug, and sat down on it, pulling her into his lap as if she were a child. He grabbed the blanket from his chair and wrapped it around them both, pulling her tight against his chest. "You are safe," he whispered into her hair. "The storm is all there is. You are safe." She cried. She wept for her husband, for her lost child, for the baby she did not want. She cried for the cold and the fear and the unending shame. Eli said nothing. He just held on, his own ghosts rising up to meet hers. He felt the ghosts of his wife, his child, the boy from Georgia, the ashes of his home. He held her, and in holding her, he held them all. They sat like that for a very long time. The fire burned down to embers. The cabin grew cold. Finally, her sobs quieted. Her breathing deepened. She was exhausted, limp against him. She stirred, becoming aware of where she was, of his arms around her, of her head resting on his chest. She tensed. "I am sorry," she whispered, her voice raw. "Do not be—" She made to pull away. He let her. She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders, her face hidden in the shadows. He fed a new log into the stove, and the fresh flames cast a flickering orange light over the room. They sat side by side on the rug, not touching. The silence returned, but it was different. It was not empty. It was filled with the confessions of the last hour. She turned her head. She looked at his hand, resting on his knee, the hand that had held the shovel with her, the hand that had held her. It was scarred, the knuckles busted, the skin rough as bark. Slowly, as if it weighed 100 pounds, she lifted her own hand. She laid it on top of his. It was a small, cold hand, trembling, but it was there. Eli looked down at her hand. He saw the broken nails, the raw skin. He felt the tremor. He did not move. He did not speak. He just let her hand rest there. It was the first human touch he had willingly accepted in 10 years. He turned his hand over, his palm up, and his fingers closed gently around hers. She looked up at him. Her eyes, shadowed and swollen, met his. There was no fear in them now, just a vast, shared emptiness. He leaned in. He was not thinking. He was just moving. He leaned in, and she did not pull away. He kissed her. It was gentle at first. His lips were chapped, hers cold. It was a kiss of pure sorrow. It tasted of salt and ash and the cold, clean air of the storm. It was a question. She answered. Her cold hand tightened in his. She leaned into him, her lips parting, and the kiss changed. It was not gentle. It became raw, hungry, desperate. This was not about love. It was about life. It was about the cold and the death and the howling wind outside and the raw, screaming need to feel something else. It was a fight. His hand moved from her hand to her face, his rough fingers tangling in her damp hair. He pulled her closer, and she met his hunger with her own, her mouth opening against his. It was a drowning. He kissed her neck, her jaw, the hollow of her throat. She arched back, a small, broken sound escaping her. He could feel the frantic beat of her heart against his hand. He pushed the blanket from her shoulder, his lips finding the cold skin. She gasped, "Eli!" He stopped. She pulled back, her chest a one-aving, her eyes wide. She was shaking again, but for a different reason. "Do not," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. "Do not give me what you will regret in the morning." He looked at her. He saw the shame flooding back into her face. She was not a woman to him. She was a whore widow, a savage's woman, a burden. And he, in his loneliness, had taken advantage. That is what she saw. He stared at her for a long moment, the firelight flickering over her face. He saw the truth of her words. He saw the ruin she carried, and he saw himself reaching for it. He nodded, a single sharp dip of his chin. He stood up. He walked to the door, grabbed his coat and his rifle. He did not put on his boots. He unbolted the door and walked out, closing it softly behind him. He went to the barn, his feet burning in the snow, and sat in the cold, dark straw. The image of her face burned into his mind. The next day, the storm broke. The sun came out, a pale, weak disk in a white-blue sky. The world was dazzling, covered in a thick, clean blanket of snow, but the cabin was suffocating. Cora was up. She had boiled coffee. She had made biscuits. She did not meet his eye. He did not meet hers. The shame from the night before was a third person in the room, cold and judgmental. He was pulling on his boots, ready to check for drifts on the roof, when he heard it. Voices. He grabbed his rifle. Cora froze, her hand flying to her throat. He opened the door a crack. 3 men on horseback were pushing through the deep drift that marked the edge of his land. They were leading a 4th horse, pulling a small supply sled. "Mr. McCade!" one of them shouted, waving. Eli stepped out onto the porch, his rifle held loosely at his side. He recognized them. Townsfolk. The one shouting was Mr. Henderson, who ran the feed store. The one beside him, tall and severe in a black coat, was the preacher, Reverend Shaw. The third was a man he did not know, broad and silent. "Reverend," Eli said, his voice flat. He did not invite them closer. "It is a hard storm, Mr. McCade," Shaw said, his horse stamping and blowing. "We came to see if you had weathered it. We saw your smoke, holding steady for days." "I weathered it." The Reverend's eyes moved past Eli, to the cabin door. Cora had stepped back, but he saw her. The preacher's face tightened. "We heard rumors," Shaw said, his voice hardening, "of a wagon broken on the trail. A woman, alone." Henderson looked nervous. "We brought supplies, Eli, just in case." "I need no supplies." Shaw dismounted, his boots sinking deep. He walked closer, his eyes fixed on the shadow in the doorway. "We know who she is, McCade." The third man, the silent one, spoke. His voice was a low growl. "She is Cora Hensley. Her husband was Jesse Longwood, a half-breed thief we ran out of the county." Cora flinched as if struck. "She is not welcome here," the Reverend said. "She brings trouble. Her kind always does. The shame of her husband follows her. It is a stain." He looked at Eli, his eyes cold. "It is not right for a decent man to harbor such a woman. It will ruin your name. It will bring God's judgment down on this place." Eli looked at the preacher. He saw the man's pinched, cruel righteousness. He saw the judgment that had hung Jesse and buried Lydia. He looked at the silent man, whose hand rested on the pistol at his hip. He felt Cora's terror behind him. He felt the memory of her hand in his, of her mouth on his. He felt the weight of her nightmare, and his own. He made a choice. It was not a thought. It was a reaction, as sharp and clean as a rifle shot. "She is not harboring," Eli said, his voice quiet, but it cut through the cold air. The Reverend paused. "What?" Eli stepped back, pulling the door open wide. Cora stood there, pale and trembling, exposed in the bright, cruel sunlight. Eli put his hand on her shoulder. It was a gesture of pure possession. "She is not harboring," Eli said again. "She is my wife." The silence that followed was absolute. Henderson's mouth fell open. The silent man's hand tightened on his gun. Reverend Shaw's face turned a dark, mottled red. He stared at Cora, then at Eli, as if he had been struck. "You lie," Shaw hissed. "You would lie before God." "I would," Eli said. "But I am not. Now get off my land." The Reverend stared at him for another long moment, his chest heaving. He was furious, thwarted. He looked at Cora with a hatred that was physical. "You will regret this, McCade," he spat. "You have yoked yourself to ruin. You have brought the stain into your own house. You will not be welcome in this valley. Neither of you." He turned, clumsy in his anger, and pulled himself back onto his horse. He spurred it brutally. Turning back toward the town, the other two men lingered, uncertain. "Go," Eli said. They went. Eli stood on the porch, watching them go. He did not release his grip on Cora's shoulder. He felt her shaking, a fine, violent tremor. When the men were gone, vanishing over the white ridge, he let his hand drop. He turned and went back inside. He began to reload the wood box, his movement stiff. He heard her follow him in. The door closed. "What have you done?" He did not turn. He kept stacking the wood. "What have you done?" she screamed, her voice breaking. She flew at him, her hands balled into fists, beating against his back. "You fool! You stupid, stupid fool! You do not know what you have done." He did not flinch. He just stood there, taking the blows. "They will ruin you," she wept, her hits growing weaker. "They will not stop. They will come back. You did not save me. You just chained yourself to me. You do not know them. You do not know what they do." She collapsed against him, her strength gone, her forehead resting between his shoulder blades, her fists still clenched against his coat. "You do not know what you have done." She did not move from his back. Her fists, still clenched, rested against his coat. He stood rigid, waiting, the wood still in his hands. He could feel her breath, hot and ragged, through the wool. "Go," she whispered. Her voice was dead. "While you still can, get on your horse and ride to town. Tell them you were wrong. Tell them you ran me off. Tell them anything." He set the wood in the box, piece by piece, the sound loud in the small, tight room. He did not turn. "No." "They will burn you out," she said, her voice rising, shaking. "They will shoot your stock. They will wait for you on the road. You think that preacher is just words? That silent man, the one with the gun. That was Del Shaw. He was the one who held the rope." Eli turned slowly. She had stepped back, her face a mask of old, cold terror. She looked like she had in the nightmare. "I know Del Shaw," Eli said. "Then you know what you have done." Her hands flew to her own coat, her few belongings. "I am going. I will not be the one who brings this to you. I will not have your death on my hands." She grabbed the mended blanket. She stuffed her brush into the pocket of her coat. She had nothing else. She moved to the door. "Stop," he said. "No, I am done bringing ruin to men." She fumbled with the latch. "Cora." His voice was not loud, but it hit her like a solid wall. It was the first time he had used her name. She froze, her hand on the iron. "They will not hunt you down," he said, his voice low. "They will not follow you, because they do not have to. The cold will do it. The wolves will do it. You will be dead by nightfall, and the child with you. It is better than being a rope around your neck," she spat. "I have carried heavier." She turned, her eyes blazing. "You do not know me. You do not know what I am." "I know what you are," he said, walking toward her. He stopped a few feet away. "You are a woman who knelt at a grave you did not know. You are a woman who tried to save a mule before herself. You are a woman who carries a child she is too scared to want." "That grave," she whispered, her anger faltering. "Why do you care?" "Because it is mine." The fight went out of her. She stared at him. "What?" "The grave on the hill. It is not empty land. It is my daughter." He looked past her, toward the window, at the white, scarred land. The words came out of him slow, like stones he was digging from his own gut. "I came back from the war. I had a fiancée. Her name was Sarah. She had waited. I thought we could build something. We did. We built this cabin. We had a child." He touched one of the rough-hewn logs of the wall. "She was born in that bed, in a storm just like this one." She did not cry. She was perfect and small and silent. We buried her up on that hill. He looked back at Cora. Her hand was at her mouth, her eyes wide. Sarah left. She left a week later. She said the man who came back from the war was not the man she promised to marry. She said this land, this house, it was full of ghosts. She was right. She went back east. I never saw her again. He took a step closer, until he could have reached out and touched her. I have been here 10 years, Mrs. Hensley, alone, with them, the ghosts. I know what it is to be haunted. I know what it is to be a stain. The men in town, they whisper about me. Too, the man the war broke, the man who lost everything. He looked down at his scarred hands. You are right. I lied. You are not my wife. But I meant what I said. I will not have you run off. I will not have you die in the snow. I will not have another small grave dug into that hill. Not while I am here. He was close enough now to feel the small warmth coming off her. We have both been cut up, he said, his voice rough. Cut up by this world, by the people in it. I am done bleeding alone, and so are you. She did not move. She did not breathe. She just watched him, her eyes searching his face, seeing for the first time not just a hard, cold rancher, but a man hollowed out by the same tools that had hollowed her. She let her hand fall from the door. She did not go to the barn that night. She did not go to the bed. Night fell. He fed the stove. He sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, cleaning his rifle. The motions, automatic, familiar. She sat on the hearth, her knees drawn to her chest, wrapped in the blanket. The silence was back, but it was not the silence of strangers. It was the silence of a shared truce. He finished with the rifle. He set it down. He looked at her. She was watching the flames, her face soft in the orange light. The bruises and the windburn faded. He saw the slight, gentle curve of her belly beneath the wool. He remembered the kiss, the shame of it. He remembered her words. Do not give me what you will regret. He did not regret it. He regretted stopping. He rose, his joints popping, and went to the water bucket. He dipped a tin cup and brought it to her. She looked up, startled, as he offered it. You should drink, he said. She took it. Her fingers brushed his. This time, neither of them pulled away. Her hand lingered on his, a light, trembling pressure. He did not move. He let her hold his hand, her small, cold fingers against his calloused palm. He knelt in front of her. Cora, he said. She met his gaze. He saw the fear there, but something else, too, a deep, aching question. He did not kiss her. He took her hand, the one holding the cup, and gently uncured her fingers from it. He set the cup on the hearth. Then he took her other hand. He held them both. I am not Jesse, he said, his voice a low rasp. I am not the men from the town. I am just a man, and I am here. He lifted one of her hands and touched his thumb to the raw, broken skin of her knuckles. He brought her hand to his mouth and pressed his lips to the back of it. It was a gesture of respect, a promise. A single tear tracked down her face. She did not wipe it away. He released her hands and cupped her face. His thumbs were rough against her skin. He looked into her eyes, letting her see all the broken, empty places inside him. He let her see the loneliness. He let her see that he, too, was a ghost. And he let her see that he saw her. Not the widow, not the shame, just Cora. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing, a small, shuddering breath escaping her. It was a surrender. He kissed her then. It was not the raw, hungry kiss of the storm. It was slow. It was tender. It was a question. And this time, she answered it. She lifted her hands and placed them on his shoulders, her fingers gripping his coat. She kissed him back, a deep, hesitant kiss that tasted of snowmelt and salt. He pulled her from the hearth onto the braided rug. He did not let her go. He laid her down, the blanket tangling around them, and followed, covering her body with his. He was heavy, solid, and real. He was warmth. He looked down at her, his face inches from hers in the flickering light. "Are you sure?" he whispered. She did not speak. She just lifted her hand and laid it against his scarred jaw. Yes. Their coming together was not a fire. It was a thaw. It was two frozen, broken things melting into each other. It was awkward and desperate and slow. It was a need to be seen, to be held, to be proven alive. He was gentle, his movements careful, mindful of her and the child she carried. He was seeking not release, but refuge. And she, beneath him, held on, her face buried in his neck, her body accepting not a lover, but a witness. It was a shared pain, a silent acknowledgement that they were both still there, despite a world that had tried its best to erase them. When it was over, he did not leave. He did not go to his chair or to the barn. He pulled her against his side, wrapping the blankets around them both. And for the first time in a decade, Eli McKay did not sleep alone. Days passed. The world began to change. The wind stopped. The sun grew a fragile, watery warmth. The great suffocating silence of the snow was broken by a new sound. Dripping, water ran in small rivers from the roof. Icicles as long as a man's arm formed, glittered, and then crashed to the ground. The snowpack began to shrink, revealing the hard, brown earth beneath. They worked. The lie he had told the preacher had settled over them, and now they had to live inside it. They did not speak of what happened on the floor. It was a thing too new, too fragile, to be touched by words. But it was there. The cabin, once his, became theirs. She cooked. He chopped. He no longer slept in the chair. He slept on the floor, near the hearth, while she took the bed. It was a step back, a new boundary, but it was one of comfort, not fear. He went out and found her broken wagon. He brought the pieces back on a sled. He spent 3 days in the barn, cutting new spokes, resetting the iron rim of the wheel. She sat with him, stitching the torn canvas cover. "You are fixing it," she said, her needle pulling the thread. "It is a good wagon," he said, sanding a piece of hickory. "Or it was." "You are fixing it so I can leave." It was not a question. He stopped sanding. He looked at her. "I am fixing it because it is broken. I am fixing it because spring is coming. We will need it to haul seed." She stopped sewing. Seed? A man cannot live on jerky. And a woman, a child, they need a garden. She looked at him, at the simple, practical set of his jaw. He was not talking about love. He was talking about survival. He was talking about a future. A week later, she was sitting at the small table. Eli had an old ledger book where he kept track of feed and expenses. Most of the pages were empty. She had it open. She was using his pencil, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. "How do you spell Cheyenne?" she asked. He looked up from the harness he was mending. "Cheyenne-E. Why?" "I am writing a letter." She did not say more. He did not ask. He watched her careful, labored script. She was writing to the preacher, the one she had planned to give her baby to. She was telling him not to wait. She was telling him the child had a home. The thaw brought mud. The land was a swamp, and the trail to town was impassable. They were still isolated, but it was a different isolation. It was no longer a prison. It was a sanctuary. They worked on the land. They cleared the winter-fallen branches. They mended the fence on the north pasture. Working side by side, he would dig the post holes. She would tamp the earth around them. It was hard, grueling work. It left her exhausted, her body aching, but she did not complain. She ate everything he put in front of her, a fierce, protective hunger in her eyes. She was eating for two. The rumors, however, had not been stopped by the mud. One morning, Eli rode out to check a trap line. He was gone for hours. Cora was in the barn, currying the mule. The animal had become her companion, the last living link to her past. She would talk to it, her voice low, telling it about Jesse, about Lydia. The mule would just flick its ears and lean into her touch. She heard a sound, a boot sucking in the mud. She froze. It was not Eli's walk. She stepped out of the stall. Del Shaw was standing there, the silent man. He was not alone. Two other men, faces she did not know, were behind him. They smelled of whiskey and hate. "Well, now," Shaw said, his eyes slow, insulting, moving over her. "Looks like the preacher was right. You made yourself comfortable, found yourself a new buck." Cora's blood went cold. "Get out! This is not your land." "It is not his either," one of the men slurred, stepping forward. "Not if he is shacking up with a breed's whore. This valley is for decent folk." "Get out," she said again, her voice shaking, but hard. Shaw smiled. It was a terrible smile. "We just came to deliver a message. Mrs. Longwood. Or is it McCade now? A message from the town?" He nodded to one of the men. The man pulled something from his coat. It was a length of new rope, tied in a hangman's knot. He tossed it. It landed in the dirt at her feet. "The last one was for him." Shaw said, "This one is for what he left in you. We do not want that kind of filth born here." Cora cried out, a sound of rage and terror, and lunged for the pitchfork. Shaw caught her wrist. He was incredibly strong. He twisted, and she fell to her knees, crying out in pain. "Leave her," one of the other men said, suddenly nervous. "Del, we just came to scare her." "She needs to learn her place," Shaw hissed, his face close to hers. "And you need to learn yours." Eli's voice. He was standing at the barn door, his rifle leveled. Not at Shaw, at the man behind him. "Let her go, Del," Eli said, his voice deadly calm. Shaw did not move. He just smiled, his grip still on Cora's arm. "Or you will shoot me. McCade, then they will shoot you, and she will be left alone. With us." "No," Eli said. "I will shoot him?" He nodded at the man on the left. "Then I will shoot him." He nodded at the man on the right. "I will kill them both before they can raise their guns. Then it will be just you and me. I am a better shot than you. Del, and I am not drunk. Let her go." Shaw looked at Eli's eyes. They were flat, cold, and empty. He saw a man who had nothing to lose, a man who had already buried everything he loved. He saw a man who would absolutely kill him. He shoved Cora away. She fell hard into the mud. "This is not over, McCade," Shaw said, backing up. "You brought this curse on yourself. Get off my land." The men mounted, their horses churning the mud. They rode out, Shaw casting one last, hateful look back. Cora did not move. She was on her hands and knees in the filth, her body racked with sobs. Eli's rifle clattered to the ground. He ran to her, kneeling in the mud, pulling her up. "Are you hurt? Did he hurt you? The baby?" "I bring ruin," she wept, collapsing against him. "I told you, I bring ruin, I bring death. Oh, God, Eli, I am so sorry." "It is not you," he said, his voice fierce, his arms crushing her to him. "It is them. It is this land. It is not you." He was holding her, rocking her, when his eyes fell on the mule. It was still in its stall, but it was not moving. He let Cora go. He walked slowly to the stall. The mule was lying on its side. Its throat had been cut. The straw was dark and wet with its blood. They had done it while she was currying it, one man distracting her while the other... He closed his eyes. The last piece of her past, gone. He heard her behind him. He heard the sound she made, a thin, broken wail that was not human. "No, no, not him! Jesse, not him!" She fell against the stall, her hands gripping the wood, her body giving way to a grief so profound it was a storm. Eli turned. He took the shovel from the wall. He grabbed her arm. "Cora, come on." "No, I cannot. He was all I had left." "Come on." He pulled her, dragging her from the barn. From the smell of death, he pulled her up the hill. He did not stop until he reached the muddy patch of ground beside the small, lone grave of his daughter. He threw the shovel into the soft earth. "Dig!" "What? No!" "Dig!" he commanded, his voice raw. "We are burying him. We are putting him in the ground. You and me, right here." "I cannot." "Yes, you can." He forced the shovel into her hands. "They took him, but we will give him a resting place. We will not let them win. We will not let them leave him to the coyotes." He was not talking about the mule. He was talking about Jesse. He was talking about Lydia. He was talking about his daughter. She looked at the shovel, then at him. She saw the tears streaming down his face. He was not crying for the mule. He was crying for her, for himself, for all of it. She took the shovel, and she dug. They worked for hours. They did not speak. They took turns, carving a deep, honest grave out of the cold, wet Wyoming earth. When it was done, he went back, and he carried the mule, wrapped in a canvas sheet, up the hill. They rolled it in. They stood over the grave, covered in mud and sweat, their chests heaving. And they cried together, for the dead, for the lost, for the living. That night, they sat by the fire. They had washed. They were clean, but they were hollow. The house was quiet. Cora stared at the flames. "He will not stop. Shaw, he will come back." "I know. He will come back for the baby. He said it. He will not let it be born." "I know." She turned to him. Her face was pale, her eyes empty. "I am so tired. Eli, I am so tired of running." "Then we stop running," he said. He got up. He went to the small shelf and took down his tin of coffee. He opened it. He reached inside and pulled out a small, simple, gold ring. It was thin, worn. "It was my mother's," he said. He knelt in front of her, just as he had the night they first came together. "It was Mary's, then it was Sarah's. She left it." He held it out. It sat in his scarred, dirty palm. Cora stared at it. "I cannot. Eli, no, you called me your wife to save my life. You do not have to." "I know what I have to do," he said. "This is not about them. This is not about the town. This is about that." He nodded toward her belly. "He will come back for the child." He said it. "He will claim it has no name, no protection. He will try to take it. We will not let him." She was crying, silent tears tracing paths through the soot on her cheeks. "I am not asking you to marry me, Cora," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he did not know how to name. "I am not asking for love. I am asking you to let me protect what is yours, what is ours." He took her hand. "Let me be the father." The ring was heavy. Cora wore it on a piece of string under her dress, resting against her skin, just over the swell of her belly. It was too loose for her thin fingers, but the weight of it was a constant, warm presence. She had not said yes, she had not said no, she had simply taken the ring, and he had understood. Hope was a stranger, and she did not trust it. It felt like the false warmth of a winter sun, a light that promised heat but offered none. But as the snow melted, running in dirty rivers down the hills, something in her began to thaw, too. She woke one morning, the cabin filled with the smell of wet earth and pine, and she smiled. It was a small, stiff thing, a pulling of muscles long unused. Eli saw it. He was at the stove, his back to her, but he saw her reflection in the dark, greasy window pane. He said nothing, but he poured an extra measure of coffee into the pot. Her hands, which had been fists, or tools, or weapons, softened. She began to touch her own belly, not with the shame of the thing she carried, but with a new, strange reverence. She would stand by the window, her hand resting on the small, hard curve, her eyes lost on the horizon. She was no longer a woman guarding a secret. She was a woman waiting. They began to plan. Their words were practical, quiet, but they were words of a future. "The south-facing slope," Eli said one evening, pointing with his knife at the muddy patch of land behind the cabin. "The sun hits it all day. We will plant the corn there. Beans by the creek bed."
"I will need chickens,"
she said, her voice soft.
"A child needs milk. A cow."
"Chickens first," he said. "A cow is a target." The word hung in the air, a reminder of the mule, of the grave on the hill. Their sanctuary was still a prison. He started working in the barn at night. She would hear the scrape of his knife, the whisper of sandpaper. He was carving. He was not a skilled man, but he was patient. He was carving a small, rough horse from a piece of pine. It was for the child. He was building a nursery out of nothing but his own stubborn will. They needed seed. They needed flour. They needed chickens. They had to go to town. The fixed wagon was sturdy. He loaded it with the few hides he had trapped over the winter. Cora climbed onto the seat, her back straight, the ring now on her finger. It was too big, but it was there. She was Mrs. McCade, a lie they had to live. The ride was tense. When they reached the muddy track of the main street, the town went silent. It was as if a bell had rung. A woman sweeping her porch stopped, her broom frozen in the air. Men talking outside the saloon lowered their voices, their eyes following the wagon. Cora stared straight ahead, her knuckles white on the seat. The general store was run by Mr. Henderson, the man who had ridden out with the preacher. He looked pale when they walked in.
"Eli,"
he stammered. "Ma'am." "Henderson," Eli said, his voice flat. He handed him a list. "Flour, salt, coffee, seed corn, and I need 3 laying hens."
I got the seed, Eli.
"But the hens, I am not sure." "Just fill the order." Cora moved away, drawn to a bolt of blue calico cloth. It was a foolish thing, but she touched it, dreaming of a small dress or a decent curtain. "Should not be putting your hands on the clean cloth." The voice was sharp, sour. A woman in a dark bonnet was glaring at Cora, her face pinched. "We do not know where those hands have been." Cora snatched her hand back as if the cloth were fire. The shame, which had been sleeping, rushed back, hot and suffocating.
"She will take 3 yards,
Eli said. He was suddenly at Cora's side. The woman's husband, a thick man in suspenders, stepped forward.
"She will take nothing. Henderson, you are not serving this.
She is my wife," Eli said. His voice was quiet, but it was harder than stone. "And she will have 3 yards of the blue. She is a half-breed's whore." The man spat. "And you are a fool for claiming her. You got no shame. McCade, bringing her in here, where decent folk trade?" Cora pulled on Eli's arm.
"Eli, please, let us go. It does not matter."
"It matters," Eli said. He did not look at the man. He looked at Henderson. "Wrap the cloth." The man, furious at being ignored, shoved Eli. "I am talking to you, McCade." Eli did not move. He was a rock. He just absorbed the shove. "Get out of my way," Eli said, his voice low, a warning. The man, emboldened by Eli's stillness and by the watching eyes of the store, swung. It was not a fist. It was a heavy, open-handed slap, meant to humiliate. The sound cracked through the silent store. Eli's head snapped to the side. A dark, red mark bloomed instantly on his cheek. He tasted blood where his tooth had cut his lip. He turned his head back. He did not raise his hands. He did not retaliate. He just looked at the man. His eyes, cold and flat, promised a future of pain. He did not need to speak. The man, looking at the stillness of a man who had just taken a blow and not even flinched, suddenly felt a chill. He took a step back, his bravado fading.
Just get out,
the man muttered, turning away, pretending to look at a barrel of nails. Henderson, shaking, threw the items into a crate.
That will be no charge. Eli, just go.
Eli put the exact coin on the counter. We pay our way. He took the crate and the cloth and walked out. Cora hurried after him, her head down, her face burning. They did not speak on the ride home. When they were back in the cabin, the sun setting, she made him sit. She brought the water bucket and a clean rag. She gently washed the cut on his lip. His jaw was already beginning to swell.
Why?
She whispered, her hands trembling.
Why did you not hit him?
You could have. He caught her hand, his rough fingers closing over hers. He wanted a fight. He wanted to prove I was just an animal, like he thought Jesse was.
He wanted to show the town I was trash.
He looked at her, his eyes clear. Fighting him would have been easy. Not fighting him. That was for us, for this, for the seed in the wagon. I will not let them take this. Cora, not with fists. She leaned her forehead against his, her tears dripping onto his bruised cheek. The town was not done. The following Sunday, Eli hitched the wagon again.
Where are we going?
Cora asked, her voice tight with fear.
To church.
Eli, no, after the store. They will not let us in. We are not hiding, he said. They live in the open with their hate. We will live in the open with our lives. They did not make it to the door. Reverend Shaw was waiting on the steps, his Bible in his hand, a black-clad sentinel, and beside him, leaning against a porch post, was Del Shaw. He was whittling a piece of wood, a small, cruel smile on his lips. Mr. McCade, the preacher said, his voice loud for the townsfolk gathering. This is a house of God. It is a place for decent families. That is why we are here, Reverend, Eli said, helping Cora from the wagon.
You are a liar, Shaw said, his face modeling. You live in sin with this woman. You have defiled the memory of her husband and brought a curse upon your own name. You will not enter. You will not stain this holy place.
Del Shaw laughed, a low, dry sound. He pushed himself off the post and walked toward Eli. He was still whittling, the knife blade flashing. Heard you took a punch, Eli, Del said, circling him.
Getting soft. Is that what this woman does to you? Makes you weak? This is not the place. Del,
Eli said. He stood between Del and Cora.
Oh, I think it is the perfect place.
Del tapped his knife against Eli's chest. The preacher here. He talks about sin. I take care of it. You and her, you are a sickness in this valley. And that thing in her belly. Eli's hand shot out. He did not grab the knife. He grabbed Del's wrist. He squeezed. The knife clattered to the boardwalk. Del's face went white with pain and surprise. Eli's grip was iron. You will not speak of my wife, Eli said, his voice a deadly whisper. Or my child. Not here. Not anywhere. He shoved Del's hand back. Del stumbled, clutching his wrist, his face a mask of pure, murderous hatred. Reverend Shaw was apoplectic.
Get out, you violent animal. You see the sin he harbors?
The townsfolk stared. Some looked ashamed, but most looked afraid. They turned their backs, one by one, and filed into the church, leaving Eli and Cora alone on the street, the sound of the organ starting up within. A few weeks passed. Spring took hold. The corn pushed small, green shoots out of the dark earth. The chickens clucked in a pen Eli had built. A fragile, quiet peace settled over the ranch. It was a life. It was broken by a man on a horse. It was the sheriff, a weary man named Gable. He did not dismount for a long time. Eli, he called. Ma'am. Sheriff, Eli said, walking out to meet him. Cora stood in the doorway, her hand on her belly. I have got papers for you. Came by the stage from Laramie. It is official. He handed Eli a thick envelope. Eli's hands, steady as they were, fumbled to open it. He read the words, his face going pale, then gray, then hardening into a cold, bleak anger. "What is it?" Cora whispered, walking toward him. He could not speak. He just handed her the letter. It was from a man named Silas Longwood, Jesse's older brother. The letter was cruel, written by a lawyer. It called Cora an unfit mother, a woman of low moral character who had abandoned her husband's good name. It spoke of her shameful new life, and it demanded custody. It claimed that by blood right, the unborn child of Jesse Longwood belonged to his family, to be raised in a decent, white, God-fearing home. A hearing was scheduled at the county courthouse in Cheyenne. In 2 weeks. Cora's legs gave out. She sank to the ground, the letter fluttering from her hand. No, not him, not Silas." "You know him?" Eli knelt beside her. "He hated Jesse," she wept, her voice a broken wail. "He hated him for his blood. He hated me for marrying him. He said I had ruined the family name, and now he wants my baby." She looked up at him, her eyes a mirror of the old, deep terror. "He will win, Eli. He is Jesse's blood. I am just me. They will listen to him. They will believe him. They will take my baby." The ride to Cheyenne was 2 days of silent, cold dread. They camped one night on the prairie. The fire a small, defiant light in a vast, indifferent darkness. Cora did not eat. She just sat, staring into the flames, her arms wrapped around her stomach, as if she could physically hold the child inside her. Eli watched her, his heart a cold knot. He had fought fists. He had fought prejudice. How could he fight a man's blood? They reached Cheyenne on the 3rd morning. It was a loud, raw town, full of noise and men. The courthouse was a new, imposing brick building. Cora pulled her horse to a stop. She was shaking so hard she could barely hold the reins. "Eli, I cannot," she whispered, her eyes wide with panic. "I cannot go in there. They will all look at me. I cannot hear them say those things. I cannot watch them take him from me. Let us go. Let us just run." "There is nowhere to run," Eli said, his voice gentle. "I do not care. I will not let them." He rode his horse closer until their knees were touching. He said nothing. He just reached out his hand. She stared at it, his scarred, calloused, strong hand. "I am here," he said. She took his hand, her small, gloved fingers laced with his. He held on, and he urged his horse forward. He held her hand as they rode down the center of the street. He held it as they dismounted. He held it as they walked up the courthouse steps, past the staring, spitting men on the boardwalk. He did not let go until they were inside the courtroom. The room was hot, smelling of stale smoke and sweat. Judge Miller was a thin, tired man with spectacles. Silas Longwood was there, a narrow-faced man in a black suit that looked too large for him. His lawyer was slick and sharp. And in the back row, watching, were Reverend Shaw and Del Shaw. They had ridden all this way just to see her fall. The lawyer spoke. His words were poison. He called Cora a vagrant, a woman of loose morals who had defiled her husband's memory by fornicating with another man before Jesse was even cold in the ground. He painted Silas as a grieving, righteous brother, seeking only to save his blood kin from a life of sin. Cora sat, small and pale, staring at her hands. The judge looked at her. "Mrs. Hensley, or Mrs. McCade, do you have anything to say to this?" Cora opened her mouth. A small, dry sound came out. She shook her head, tears rolling down her face. She had no words to fight this. "Judge?" Eli was on his feet. The judge nodded. "Mr. McCade." Eli's heart was hammering. He was not a man of words. He was a man of fences and rifles and silence. "My name is Eli McCade," he said, his voice rough. "The woman is Cora McCade. She is my wife." "A lie," the lawyer shouted. "A marriage of convenience, performed by no one, to hide her shame." "It is not a lie." Eli's voice cracked. The room, which had been buzzing, went dead silent. He was not looking at the judge. He was not looking at the lawyer. He was looking at Cora. He was shaking. The solid stone-like man was visibly trembling. "I buried my first child," he said, his voice breaking. "On a hill, I buried my wife. I lived 10 years in that house. I was empty. I was dead. I was a ghost." He pointed a shaking finger at Cora. "This woman, she came to my land with nothing. She was colder and more broken than I was. She had buried her own child on the prairie. She had watched her husband die. They call her a stain. They call her shame. They are wrong. She is the strongest person I have ever known." He took a step toward the judge, his hands clenched. "That child she is carrying." He choked on the words. He fought for breath. "That child is not from my blood. I know that." He turned, his face wet, and looked at Cora. "But it is mine." He was weeping now, the silent, hard man breaking open in a room full of enemies. "It is mine in every way that matters," he cried, his voice raw with a decade of unfelt grief. "It is our second chance. It is the child of my house. It is my child. You take that child, judge, and you are not taking a bastard. You are taking my son. You are taking my daughter. You are taking everything we have left. You are killing us both." He slumped, his testimony finished, his body heavy with the admission. The courtroom was a vacuum. The only sound was Eli's ragged breathing. Judge Miller stared at Eli for a long, long time. He looked at Silas Longwood's bitter face. He looked at Delshaw's sneer. He looked at Cora, who was staring at Eli, her face a mask of utter, stunned, heartbreaking love. The judge slammed his gavel. The sound made everyone jump. "This court sees no evidence of unfitness," he said, his voice sharp. "It sees only prejudice and greed. The welfare of a child is best served with its mother, and with its father." He nodded, just once, at Eli. "Case dismissed." Cora made a sound, a small gasp, and covered her mouth. Eli stood frozen, as if he could not believe it. They walked out. They did not run. They walked, Eli's arm around Cora's waist, holding her up. As they passed the back row, Delshaw's voice cut through the air. He laughed. It was a low, ugly, scraping sound. "You heard him, preacher," Del sneered. "My child. He is claiming a half-breed's bastard." Eli stopped, turning. Delshaw spit a stream of tobacco juice on the floor, inches from Eli's boot. "That baby's cursed, McCade," Del whispered, his eyes full of a terrible, cold promise. "You cannot wash the blood out of it, and a piece of paper from a judge does not make you safe." They got the horses. They rode. They did not talk. They were stunned. They had won. They pushed the horses hard, wanting to be home, wanting to be away from the town, from the hate. The sun was getting low, painting the canyons a deep, bloody red. They were in a narrow pass, the rocks rising high on both sides. A sound cracked through the quiet air. It was not thunder. It was a rifle. Cora screamed. Eli grunted, a sharp exhalation of breath, and lurched forward in the saddle. "Eli!" He was clutching his left arm. Dark blood was already soaking his sleeve, dripping onto the horse's mane. "It is just a graze," he gritted out, his face pale. "Go! Ride!" Another shot echoed from the ridge above, kicking up a spray of dirt just behind his horse's hooves. "Ride, Cora, go!" He spurred his horse, and they flew down the canyon, low over the horses' necks, the sound of the unseen rifle and Delshaw's laughter echoing in the stones behind them. They had won the battle, but the war for their quiet life had just begun. They did not stop running until the cabin was in sight, a dark, solid shape against the dying light. Eli slid from the saddle, his boots hitting the mud, and his knees buckled. "Eli!" Cora was off her horse in an instant, scrambling to his side. "I am fine," he gritted, his face the color of ash. He clutched his left arm, where the blood was now a thick, dark stain from his shoulder to his wrist. "The bullet went through. It is just blood." "Get inside, now." The terror that had paralyzed her in Cheyenne was gone, burned away by a cold, sharp fury. She was no longer a victim. She was a defender. She half lifted, half dragged him through the door and shoved him into the chair. "The whiskey," he said, his teeth chattering. "On the shelf." She did not get him a glass. She brought the bottle, a clean rag, and his sharpest knife. "Take off your shirt." He fumbled with the buttons, his good hand shaking. She ripped the wet, bloody fabric open. The wound was ugly. The bullet had torn through the thick muscle of his shoulder, missing the bone, but leaving a ragged path. "It is a graze," he whispered, his head leaning back. "It is a hole. Eli, hold still!" She poured the whiskey straight into the wound. He roared, a low, guttural sound, his whole body arching off the chair. His knuckles went white. "I told you to hold still," she said, her voice shaking but her hands steady. She blotted the blood, her touch surprisingly gentle. The cabin was silent, save for his harsh, ragged breathing. She tore a clean sheet into long strips. She packed the wound, her movements quick and efficient, and bound his shoulder so tightly he gasped. "It will hold," she said. She went to the door, took his rifle, and barred the latch. She lit the lantern and looked out the window, into the dark. "He will not come back tonight," Eli said from the chair. "He thinks he did his work." "He will come back," she said. She did not turn from the window. For the next week, she was the rancher. Eli, weak from blood loss and a creeping fever, was a prisoner in his chair. He watched, frustrated and in pain. As she took his rifle every morning and went out to feed the horses, she hauled the water. She tended the small garden, weeding the corn shoots with one eye on the ridgeline. She never went farther than shouting distance of the cabin. She never let the rifle leave her side. She nursed him with a fierce, quiet intensity. She forced broth into him. She changed his bandage, her face grim at the sight of the angry, healing flesh. She did not sleep in the bed. She slept on the floor by the door, the rifle resting against her shoulder, her hand on her swollen belly. "Cora, you must sleep," he said one night, his fever high. "I will sleep when you can stand," she answered, her eyes on the black square of the window. "He will not get a second chance. Not at you, not at this baby." Eli watched her. He saw the woman who had fought the barn door, the woman who had knelt in the snow. But she was different. The shame was gone, burned away by the hearing, by the bullet. The fear was still there, but it was a cold, useful fear. It was the fear a mother wolf has for her den. She was no longer running. She was protecting. His arm healed. The fever broke. The wound closed, leaving another thick, ropey scar on his already marked body. He stood, his legs stiff, and took the rifle from her. "I will feed the horses," he said. She did not argue. She just nodded and went to the stove to make coffee. The balance had shifted, and they both knew it. Spring turned warm. The threat from Del Shaw was a constant, unspoken presence, like the thunderheads that gathered on the mountains every afternoon. But life had to go on. The corn grew. The baby grew. One afternoon, Eli went to the barn. He returned with the piece of pine he had been carving before the trip to Cheyenne. He sat on the porch, the sun on his back, and began to work again. His left arm was stiff, and he moved slowly. But he was patient. Cora came out and sat on the step, mending one of his shirts. She watched his hands, saw the small, rough shape of a horse emerge from the wood. "That is for him," he said, not looking up. "Or her?" Cora whispered. She had her hand on her belly. She felt the child move, a small, fluttering kick. Him or her? He finished the horse, but he did not stop. He went back to the barn and retrieved the good, solid planks he had salvaged from her broken wagon. He began to build. He worked for 3 days. He was making a crib. It was rough, built with pegs and stubbornness, not skill. The wood was warped, scarred by the prairie, but it was strong. He sanded it smooth with a piece of sandstone until his fingers were raw. When he was done, he brought it into the cabin. It was small, but it was solid. It was the first new piece of furniture the house had ever seen. "It needs a mark," Eli said. He took his knife. He looked at her. Cora was silent for a long time. To name it was to claim it. To claim it was to love it. To love it was to invite a pain she knew too well. "See, Jay," she whispered, her hand going to the ring that hung under her dress. Eli looked at her. "See, Jay." "Catherine," she said, her voice stronger. "It was my middle name." "Catherine," Eli repeated. He liked the sound. He looked at the wood. "And the J?" Cora met his gaze. There were no more secrets. There was no more shame. He had claimed her, and the child, in a court of law. He deserved the whole truth. "Jesse." Eli's hand tightened on the knife. He looked at the crib, at the woman in front of him, at the belly that held another man's child. He thought of his testimony. Mine in every way that matters. He nodded. He turned the crib and, with deep, careful strokes, carved the initials into the headboard. C.J. It was a promise. It was an acceptance. It was a fact, carved in wood. That night they were woken by a new sound. Not a gunshot, not a voice. It was a roar. Eli was out of the bed before he was truly awake. He smelled it first. Smoke, kerosene. He threw the door open and a wall of heat hit him in the face. The barn was not just on fire, it was an explosion. Flames were leaping 100 feet into the air, a massive swirling column of orange that turned the night sky blood red. The sound was a freight train, a hungry, angry beast. "No!" Cora screamed from the doorway, her hands clutching her face. "The horses!" Eli yelled. He did not grab his rifle. He did not grab his boots. He just ran, barefoot, toward the inferno. "Eli, no, it is too late. It will collapse." He ignored her. The main barn door was already a sheet of fire. He ran to the smaller stable door at the side. It was red hot. He kicked it. The wood splintered, and a cloud of black, choking smoke and embers poured out. He covered his face with his arm and plunged inside. "Eli!" Cora's scream was lost in the roar. She waited. 1 second, 2, an eternity. She was sure he was dead. Then he burst out, half falling, his hair and eyebrows singed. He was driving the 2 horses, slapping their rumps, screaming. They were terrified, their eyes white, their manes smoking. They thundered past her and disappeared into the darkness. Eli fell to his knees, coughing, his lungs burned by the smoke. "The chickens!" Cora cried, pointing. The small coop, built too close, was catching. The dry pine went up like a matchbox. There was a frantic, terrible sound from within, and then silence. They could do nothing. They stood by the cabin, helpless, and watched it burn. They watched their winter hay, their tools, the fixed wagon, the last remnants of her old life, all turn to ash. The roof of the barn groaned, leaned, and collapsed in on itself, sending a volcano of sparks into the sky. Eli walked the perimeter, his body shaking with a rage so cold it was almost silent. He was looking for a sign. He found it, near the path, a metal can, tossed into the wet grass. He picked it up. It was still damp. kerosene. He hurled the can into the darkness. "It was Dell," he said. His voice was raw from the smoke. "This was his answer. This was his judgment." Cora began to shake. "We have to call the sheriff. We have to tell him." "Gable," Eli laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "Gable will do nothing. He will come out. He will look at the ash. He will agree it is a shame. He will say there is no proof, no witnesses. Just a can. There is no law for us. Cora, there is just this." He gestured to the smoking ruins, to the vast, empty dark. Cora looked at the fire. She looked at the cabin. She looked at Eli, his face black with soot, his arm newly scarred, his body trembling. She saw the future, fire, blood, and death. The next morning, she was packing. She had one small saddlebag. She was stuffing her dress, the blue calico, into it. "What are you doing?" Eli was standing in the doorway. He had not slept. His eyes were red, rimmed with soot and exhaustion. "I am leaving," she said. She did not look at him. She kept packing. "I have to. You see what he does? He will not stop. He will not stop until we are all in the ground. He took the mule. He took your arm. Now he takes the barn, the wagon, the chickens. The house is next. Eli." "So you will run?" "Yes," she spun on him, her face a mask of frantic despair. "I will run. He is not after you. He is after me. He is after this baby. I will not be your ruin. I will not let you die for me." "And where will you go? Cora? Back to Cheyenne? To Silas? You think he will not find you?" "I do not know. I will go north. I will go anywhere. But I will not stay here and watch him burn you in your bed." He walked toward her. He was slow, deliberate. He took the saddlebag from her shaking hands and tossed it onto the bed. He grabbed her arms. "We do not run," he said. His voice was quiet, but it was shaking with a terrible, cold fury. "We never run." "But we have nothing," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "It is gone. He won." "No." He shook her, gently. "He did not win. Look." He pointed out the window. "The house is standing. The corn is still in the ground. The horses are in the pasture. We are still breathing." He pulled her closer. His eyes locked on hers. "If we run, we teach them they are right. We teach them that their fire is stronger than our seed. We teach them that their hate wins. I will not let him win. We are not leaving." "Then what?" she whispered, her fight gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. "What do? We just wait for him to come back." "No," Eli said, releasing her. "We do not wait. We build." He turned and grabbed the shovel. He walked out the door. He did not go to the smoking ruins of the barn. He went up the hill, toward the two lonely graves. Cora followed him, her body aching, her belly a heavy, low weight. "Eli, what are you doing? What is there to build?" He reached the top of the hill. He shoved the shovel into the soft earth near the graves. "He burns wood. He shoots animals." He bent down and his hands closed around a heavy, gray field stone, half buried in the grass. He grunted, lifting it. "He cannot burn stone." He carried the stone to the plot and set it down, marking a corner. Cora stared at him. "You are building a wall." "I am building a line," he said, his breath hissing. He went back for another stone. "They took my child. They took your husband. They took your daughter. They took our mule. They will not touch our dead. They will not touch this ground." He was not just building a wall around the graves. He was building a fortress. He was anchoring them to this land, to their shared losses. It was an act of pure, stubborn defiance. He heaved another rock into place. His back screamed. His burned arm ached. He did not care. Cora watched him for a long, silent moment. She saw the madness in it, and she saw the truth. She bent down. Her hands closed around a smaller stone. It was heavy. She was 9 months pregnant. She grunted, lifting it, and waddled to the low-growing wall. She placed it beside his. They worked all day. They did not speak. The only sounds were the scrape of stone on stone, the grunt of lifting, the thud of placement. They were a man and a woman, covered in mud and sweat, building a low, thick, ugly wall against the world. They were surrounded by the ghosts of what they had lost, and they were together, refusing to be haunted. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of fire, they were done. The wall was barely 2 feet high, but it was thick and it was solid. It was a scar on the land, a sign. It said, "We are here. We do not run." They stood inside it, between the 2 graves. Eli was leaning on the shovel, his body trembling with exhaustion. Cora had her hand on her back, her breath coming in short, pained gasps. "He will not move this," Eli said. "No," she whispered, "he will not." That night, the sky broke, the heat of the fire, the work of the day. It had all been building. A spring thunderstorm, violent and sudden, swept down from the mountains. The air was split by a crack of thunder so loud it shook the dishes on the shelf. Cora cried out, clutching the table. "It is just the storm," Eli said, barring the door against the sudden, driving rain. "No." She looked at him, her eyes wide with a new, immediate terror. "Eli, it is not the storm." She gasped, her hand flying to her belly, her knees buckling. Eli caught her. "What? What is it?" "It is the baby," she panted. "It is too soon. Eli, it is not time." As if to answer, another pain seized her, and she cried out, her fingers digging into his arms. A gush of water soaked her dress, pooling on the floor. "Oh, God," she wept. "No, not now, not like this." The panic Eli had suppressed for weeks seized him. The town was miles away. The trail a river of mud, the fire, the attack, and now this. There was no midwife. There was no help. There was only him. "It is all right," he said, his voice sounding high and strange to his own ears. He lifted her, his healing arm screaming in protest, and carried her to the bed. "It is time. It will be fine." He was lying. He was terrified. He remembered his first daughter. The silence, the blood, the small, still body. "No, not again," he whispered. The storm raged. Rain lashed the windows. The wind howled like a mourner. Inside, Cora was lost. The labor was fast, brutal, and raw. She was not the stoic woman from the prairie. She was a woman in terror, screaming, fighting. "I cannot," she shrieked, her back arching. "It is wrong. Eli, I am killing it. I cannot do it." "Yes, you can," he yelled back, his fear turning to a desperate, raw command. He was wiping her face with a wet rag, his hands shaking so hard he could barely hold it. "You can. Cora, you fought them all. You will fight this. You are not alone. Breathe. Push. Now." He was between her legs, his hands, which knew only tools and rifles, waiting. He was weeping, the tears streaming down his sooty face. "Come on, baby," he pleaded. "Come on, do not do this to us, do not." A final, terrible scream from Cora was swallowed by a crack of thunder that seemed to split the cabin in two. And then, silence. A small, wet, blue-gray form slid into his trembling hands. It was still. It did not move. It did not cry. "No," Eli breathed. His heart stopped. "No, no, no, no." "Eli!" Cora's voice was a thin thread. "Eli, why is it quiet? Why is it not crying?" "Breathe," Eli whispered, his hands fumbling. He turned the baby over. It was slick, small. He slapped its back. Nothing. "Breathe, damn you. Breathe. Cry." He slapped it again, harder. A desperate, angry sound. A small, sputtering gasp. A choke. And then a wail. It was not a strong cry.
It was a thin, furious, cutting sound, like a tiny kitten, but it was life. It cut through the sound of the rain, the wind, and the fear. Eli collapsed, his forehead resting on the edge of the mattress, his body shuddering with a relief so profound it was painful. He fumbled for his knife, cut the cord, and wrapped the tiny, squirming thing in a clean piece of the sheet. "It is a girl," he choked out, his voice thick. "Cora, it is a girl!" He laid the baby on Cora's chest. Cora stared at her. She was silent. Her body was limp, her face pale and streaked with sweat, her eyes wide and vacant. She just stared at the small, wrinkled, red-faced thing that was screaming on her chest. "Cora," Eli said, his new joy turning to fear. Cora looked at the baby. She looked at its tiny, perfect, clenched fists. She looked at its full head of dark hair. She looked at Eli, his face a ruin of soot, tears, and relief. A strange sound bubbled in her throat. She laughed. It was a cracked, broken, hysterical sound. She laughed at the fire, at the storm, at the blood, at the sheer, impossible stubbornness of the life she held. The laughter shattered, and she began to weep. It was not the weeping of grief. It was the weeping of a dam breaking. She sobbed, pulling the baby closer, kissing its wet head, her tears baptizing its face. "She is here," Cora wept, her voice raw. "Eli, she is here. She is alive." Eli sat on the edge of the bed. His barn was ash. His enemy was out there. In the dark, the world was still a brutal, unforgiving place. He reached out a trembling finger and touched the baby's hand. The tiny fingers, impossibly small, curled and gripped his. He looked at Cora, her face transformed, and he leaned down. He kissed his wife, his lips tasting the salt of her tears. Then he kissed the top of his daughter's head. The storm raged, but the war, for this one night, was over. News of a birth travels fast, even in a valley of enemies. It rode on the wind with the smoke from the ruined barn, a stubborn fact that could not be burned or shot. The town heard, and the town was torn. Eli rode in for lumber and salt 2 weeks after Catherine was born. He left Cora at the cabin, the door bolted, his rifle in her lap. He walked into Henderson's store, his bruised, battered face a map of the fight he had won, and the store went silent. No one spoke, no one spat. The slap, the fight at the church, the burned barn, the showdown at Dell's ranch. It had all settled into a heavy, grudging respect. They did not like him. They did not approve. But they no longer saw him as a fool. They saw him as a man who would not be moved. Henderson, his face pale, measured out the order. "The lumber will be alone. Eli, pay when you can." Eli put the coin on the counter. "We pay our way." As he loaded the wagon, Sheriff Gable approached, not wearing his badge. He was holding a small, carved wooden bird. "My wife," Gable muttered, looking at his own boots. She whittles. For the baby. A girl, we heard." Eli took the bird. It was smooth, simple, and perfect. "Tell her thank you, Sheriff." "McCade," Gable said, his voice low. "Del Shaw is gone. Rode out 2 days after, took his men. They say he went to the mining camps up north. He will not be back." Eli nodded, processing the news. The weight of the constant threat lifted, leaving a strange, hollow quiet. "Does not mean the rest of them feel different," Gable warned, nodding toward the saloon. "But they are quiet. You kept your head. You did not kill him. That meant something to them. You are just a rancher, not a raider." Gable touched his hat. "Be safe, McCade. The valley is watching." Eli rode home. When he arrived, he found a small bundle on the porch, left while he was gone. He opened it. Inside was a thick, knitted wool blanket, dyed a soft yellow with onion skins. There was no note. He found a jar of honey by the door the next week.
and a small sack of dried apples. The town was split. The hate was still there, but it was quiet, and under it, a fragile, secret thread of kindness had begun to grow. The women, mothers themselves, were sending offerings to the baby. They were gifts left in the dark, anonymous acts of truce. With Dell gone, the heavy, suffocating fear began to recede. The land, which had been a prison, started to feel like a home again. Summer came in full, hot and green. The corn was knee-high, the small garden behind the house thick with beans and squash. The stone wall on the hill was a solid, permanent line. Eli had started the frame of the new barn, the fresh-cut pine smelling sharp and clean in the sun. One morning, Eli did not pick up his axe. He washed his face. He put on his one clean shirt. He went to Cora, who was humming to the baby, now sleeping in the rough-hewn crib. "Come on," he said, his voice gentle. "Where?" "It is time." He took her hand. She settled Kate in a sling against her chest. He led her out of the cabin, past the dark, smoking circle of the old barn, and up the hill. They stood inside the low stone wall they had built. The two graves, one old, one new, were covered in wild grass. The land was quiet. The only sound was the wind in the leaves of the tall cottonwood tree that shaded the plot. He had no Bible, he had no preacher. He had only the land, the sky, and the ghosts of what they had both lost. He turned to her. He reached under his shirt and pulled the thin gold ring from the string. He had cleaned it. It shone in the sun. "I have no words. Cora," he said, his voice rough. "I am not a man for speeches. I only know I was dead, and you, and her." He touched the baby's head. "You are my life. I am done being haunted." He held out the ring. "I, Eli McCade, take you, Cora Hensley, to be my wife, to build with, to protect, before God, before this land." Tears streamed down her face. She pulled the ring from her own neck, the one she had worn since he offered it. She slid it onto her finger. It was still too loose. She did not care. "I, Cora Hensley," she whispered, her voice shaking, "take you, Eli McCade, to be my husband, to stand with, to heal with, my home." He did not kiss her. He just leaned his forehead against hers. His eyes closed. He put his scarred hand over hers, and his other hand on the small, warm back of the baby. They stood there for a long time, a family of three, rooted in the earth, married by the wind. Life settled. It was not easy. It was ranching, and ranching was a fight against the earth itself. But it was a good fight, not a fight against men. With credit from Henderson, Eli dug a new well, deeper than the old one, hitting a clean, cold spring. He traded his traps for a new cow, and Kate's cries were soon quieted with warm milk. The crowning piece was the windmill. It took him a month, working with Sheriff Gable and two other ranchers who, grudgingly, had come to respect his stubbornness. They raised it in late summer, a tall, spindly tower with a spinning, flashing head. It was a promise. It meant water. It meant life. It meant they were not just surviving. They were staying. The land began to bloom. The corn was harvested, thick and heavy. The new barn was roofed before the first snow. The cabin was warm, the woodpile high. The baby grew. Kate. They called her Catherine. She was a quiet, watchful child, with her mother's pale skin and a shock of dark, black hair that Eli swore was his. Though Cora knew it was Jesse's, it did not matter. She crawled on the floor of the new barn, her small hands dusty with sawdust. Eli, whose face had once been a mask of stone, was now rarely seen without a small, soft smile. Cora would watch from the cabin door as he sat on the new fence line, teaching Kate to walk. He would hold her tiny hands, his massive, scarred fingers wrapped around hers. "That is it," he would murmur, his voice a low, gentle rumble. One foot, now the other. You see, you are standing. You are standing on your land." The child would stumble, fall, and look up at him, her face serious. And he would laugh, a real open sound, and lift her high, her small body lost in his arms as he buried his face in her neck. Winter came again. It was as harsh as the last, the snow deep, the wind a bitter knife. But this year, the cabin was not a refuge, it was a home. One night, the storm was howling. Eli was asleep in his chair by the stove, exhausted from a day of clearing snow. The cabin was warm, the firelight flickering. Cora sat in the rocking chair Eli had built for her, a rough, solid thing that creaked with a comforting rhythm. Kate was asleep in the crib, her breath a soft, even sound. Cora looked at her husband. He was sleeping, his face relaxed, the hard lines softened. He was no longer the ghost who had found her at the barn. He was a man, her man. She rose, went to her small tin box, the one that had survived the wagon, the flight, the fire. She opened it. Inside, there was only one thing left. A letter, folded and refolded. The paper soft as cloth, the ink faded. It was Jesse's last letter, the one he had written the night before the lynching, the one a kind neighbor had slipped to her. She had read it 100 times, but she had never understood it until now. She sat by the fire and unfolded it. "My dearest Cora, if you are reading this, I am gone. Do not weep for me. I am not afraid. I have lived more life with you than most men get in 100 years. I saw my daughter's face. I loved you. That is all that matters. This hate, this land, it is small. What we had is bigger. Do not let this be your end. Do not let them make a grave for you. 2. Your heart is too strong for that. I want you to live. I want you to laugh again. I want you to find a good, strong man who will see you. Cora, the way I see you, do not feel guilt. My love for you is not a chain. It is a blessing. Take it and go live. Be happy. Raise our child. Love again. Love without guilt. That is all I ask. I will be waiting for you, but do not hurry." "Jesse," she cried, not the broken, hollow sobs of her grief, but the quiet, cleansing tears of a final goodbye. She had held on to this letter, to his memory, like armor. She did not need it anymore. She looked at Eli, his head tipped back, his mouth slightly open. She looked at Catherine, her daughter, safe and warm. Cora kissed the paper. She walked to the pot-bellied stove and opened the small iron door. The fire was a hot, glowing red. She held the letter over the flames. She watched the edges curl, turn brown, then black. She watched Jesse's words, his blessing, turn to ash and float up the chimney. A great shuddering weight lifted from her chest. She was free. She closed the stove. She was no longer Jesse's widow. She was Eli's wife. The sun was setting, the last light casting a cold, red glow through the window. Eli stirred, then woke. He stretched, the long muscles in his back popping. He saw her standing by the stove, her face peaceful in the firelight. He smiled. He stood and walked to the crib. He looked down at the sleeping child for a long moment. Then gently, he lifted her. Kate murmured in her sleep, her small hand finding his beard, and settled onto his shoulder. Eli stood by the window, his back to Cora, rocking the baby, looking out at the white, empty land that was, finally, theirs. Cora came up behind him. She did not speak. She just wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her cheek against his strong, scarred back. She felt the warmth of his body, the solid, steady beat of his heart. She saw her daughter's dark hair, so like Jesse's, spread over Eli's shoulder. She tightened her grip, her heart full to bursting. "You are her father," she whispered. Eli's hand came up, covering hers where they were joined. He leaned his head back, his rough cheek finding hers, and he watched the last sliver of the sun disappear, leaving them in the warm, quiet dark. Always. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love to hear your thoughts, so please comment where you are listening from to connect with others. Subscribe to the From Wild West channel, and share your feelings on Eli and Cora's journey.